Good evening, all of you. In the last session, we have seen REST API development and REST client development summary. Yesterday's session was conclusion for REST API development and REST client development. Yesterday's session was conclusion for REST API development and REST client development. Okay, good. Now, today we are going to talk about one of the main feature of the Spring Boot, that is actuators. In the today's session, I'm going to talk about one of the important feature that is called Spring Boot actuators. Actuators is one of the feature available in Spring Boot. Actuator is one of the feature. Actuators is one of the feature available in Spring Boot, and it is very powerful feature. Actuators, the official definition for the actuators is actuators are used to provide production ready features of the application. Actuators are used for providing production ready features for the application. This is the official definition which is given by Spring Boot. There is official definition given by Spring Boot. Actuators is one of the feature available in Spring Boot. Actuators are used for providing production ready features for the application. So what is the meaning of these production ready features? By using actuators, we can monitor and manage our application. By using actuator, we can monitor and manage our application. By using actuators, we can monitor and manage our application. Now, guys, we are developing one application and we are deploying our application into server, right? So this is a server. Inside the server, our application will be running. Inside the server, our application will be running. Got it? Server is available. Inside the server, we have our application. Now, this server is running in some other location. There is one computer which is available in some USA, California machine available in USA country, California state. A machine available in USA, California state. In that machine, we have installed one server. In that machine, we have installed one server. In that server, we have deployed our application. In the server, we have deployed our application. When our application is deployed to the server, do we need to monitor that application or we no need to monitor the application? Do we need to monitor the application or we no need to monitor the application? We need to monitor the application and we need to manage the application. What is the meaning of monitoring the application? What is the meaning of monitoring the application? What is health of our application? What is health of our application? The health is available. The health is good or bad. Application health. The memory is sufficient for our application or not. Application health is up or down. Application health is up or down. Up means all the environment is proper. Memory is sufficient to run all the components of the application. Health status is up or health status is down. We need to check that. What is the health of the application? What is the health of the application? How many beans loaded? How many beans loaded by our application? That means how many classes loaded by our application? What configuration properties what config properties, what config props loaded by our application, what config props loaded by our application, what config props loaded by our application, heap details, what is heap information, what is heap info of our application. That means how many objects are created in our application, how many threads are running in our application, how many threads running in our application, how many threads running in our application, how many URLs are available in our application, how many URL mappings available in our application, how many URL mappings available in our application. These all things I want to monitor. So whenever I have deployed my application to the server, that means my task is not completed. Whenever we deploy our application to the server, we need to monitor and we need to manage our application. Whenever you develop the application, if you deploy the application, if the application is running continuously, we need to monitor. Application deployed to server means a patient is in the ICU. 24/7, we need to monitor and we need to manage our application. 24/7, we need to monitor and we need to manage our application. 24/7, we need to monitor and we need to manage our application. What is health of our application? Application health is up or down. How many beans loaded by our application? How many classes loaded by our application? What are the configuration properties loaded by our application? What is the heap information of our application? How many threads are running in our application? How many URL mappings available in our application? What is the log status of my application? What is the log status of my application? What is the environment of my application? I want to stop my application. Like this, we can monitor and manage this application. If we use actuators, we can get all the above information. If we use actuators, it will provide all the above information about our application. Actuators will provide all the above information related to our application. Are you guys able to understand why we are going for actuators now? Actuators is one of the feature available in Spring Boot. Actuators is one of the feature available in the Spring Boot. Actuators are used for providing production ready features for the application. By using actuators, we can monitor and manage our application. So what kind of details I need about my application? I need what is the health of my application. I need how many beans loaded by my application. I need what configuration properties loaded by my application. I need heap information of my application. I need threads information of my application. I need what are the URL mappings available in our application. In order to get all the details, we are going to use actuators. In order to get all the details, we are going to use actuators in the Spring Boot. Now, do you get the clarity? What is actuator? Now, do you understand what is actuator in the Spring Boot? What is the purpose of actuator? Yes. Can anyone tell me what is actuator and what is the purpose of actuator? You just read this screen, it will give you clarity. Actuators are used for providing production ready features of the application. By using actuators, we can monitor and manage our application. Health, beans, config props, heap information, threads information, URL mappings. All the details about our application we can access by using actuator. Good. Come on, guys. You got my point? Yeah. To use actuators in our application, we need to add actuator starter in the form.xml. To configure actuators in our application, Spring Boot provided below starter. We have to add that in form.xml file. To configure actuators in our application, Spring Boot provided one starter. We have to add that in form.xml file. What is that starter? Spring Boot starter actuator. Spring Boot starter actuator. So this is the starter we need to add in the form.xml. We need to add this starter in the form.xml. Then we can work with that starter. Good. Let's go to our project. Let's create one project by using Spring Boot. Let's create one project by using Spring Boot. File, new, Spring Starter project. File, new, Spring Starter project. I'm creating a project with the name called 43 Spring Boot Actuator App. Spring Boot Actuator App. Spring Boot Actuators App. Next. Now, web dependency, dev tools. Now we need to add one more dependency called actuator. Spring Boot actuator. Now, see this. What is the definition they are giving? Supports built-in custom endpoints that let you monitor and manage your application, such as application health, application metrics, application session, etc. All the application details you can monitor and you can manage by using actuators available in the Spring Boot. Click on next and click on finish. Next and finish. Actuator project is creating. I have added one new dependency which is called Spring Boot Starter Actuator. I have added one dependency called Spring Boot Starter Actuator. Close unrelated projects. I want to close all the remaining projects. I want to keep only actuator project open. Yeah. Actuator project is open. Can you go to form.xml and can you see what is the dependency that is created? The new dependency we have added for the first time, that is actuator dependency. By using actuator dependency, we can monitor and manage our application. You see this Spring Boot Starter actuator added, Spring Boot Starter web added, Spring Boot DevTools added. Now I have selected actuator dependency, right? Let's go and create one simple REST controller. I'm creating one simple REST controller inside the REST package, which is welcome REST controller. Welcome REST controller. In that, I will write just one welcome method, which will give welcome. Okay. Now, public string welcome message. Public string welcome message. Return welcome to Ashok IT. Return welcome to Ashok IT. This method I'm binding to one get request. This method I'm binding to get request with /welcome, and I'm making this as a REST controller. I want to make this class as a REST controller. I want to make this class as REST controller. Okay, how can I make it as a REST controller? By using @REST controller annotation. Similarly, I want to create one more class which is called as greet REST controller. I want to make this class also as a REST controller. For that, I'm using @REST controller annotation, and I'm writing one method in this class also. Public string greet message good evening. Simple. This is also returning one message good evening. Now let's make it as get mapping. Let's make it as get mapping / greet / greet. Now import it. Oh, so with this we are good. With this we are good. Welcome REST controller is available, which is having one get request method binded to /welcome URL. Greet REST controller is available, which is having one get request method binded to /greet URL. Now let's go to one properties file. Let's go to one properties file. Let me configure port number. Server.port is equal to 9090. My application is ready. Port number is available. Close this. Run this project. Run as boot app. Run as Spring Boot app. Run as Spring Boot app. Access that welcome application and greet application. Before going to access, can you see this? Exposing one endpoint beneath the base path /actuator. So actuator is enabled for our application, or actuator is not enabled for our application. Actuators are enabled. Exposing one endpoint beneath the base path /actuator. We'll talk about it. Application started on the port number 9090. Let's go to browser. Let's go to browser. Localhost colon 9090 /welcome. Okay, application is running. Now let's go here /greet. Application is running. /welcome application is running. /greet application is running. Are you able to follow this? Are you able to follow this? Now application I have developed, application is running, but suppose in the real time several people are working on our application. In the real time several people are working on our application. I want to understand how many classes are loaded, how many threads are running, how many objects are created, what is the health of my application. I want to understand all the details. Who will provide all the details for us? My application is ready. My application is running. Now I want to monitor my application. Who will help us to monitor our application in the Spring Boot? Actuators. So what is the actuator? Actuators is one of the powerful concept introduced in the Spring Boot. Actuator is one of the powerful concept which introduced in the Spring Boot. By using actuators, we can monitor and we can manage our application. What information actuator is providing for us? We can understand health of our application. We can understand how many beans are loaded. We can understand what configuration properties loaded by our application. We can understand heap details. We can understand threads details. We can understand URL mappings available in our application. Okay, so if you use actuator, you can get all this information from your application. That means you can monitor the application and you can manage the application. How can we use actuators in the project? For that purpose only, I have added actuator dependency in the pom.xml. For that purpose only, I have added actuator dependency in the pom.xml. Are you guys able to understand? Are you guys able to understand what is the purpose I have added this dependency? I want to use actuators. That is the reason I have added actuator dependency. Okay. Now, in order to get the details about the actuator, let's give a URL /actuator. Let's give a URL called /actuator. Now, what it is telling, what is actuator is telling, how many URL patterns it is giving now? Health URL pattern it is giving. When you give this URL, once the application started, we can see actuator endpoints which are exposed by using below URL. Once our application started, we can use below URL to see actuator endpoints which are exposed. That means which we can access. To see actuator endpoints which are exposed. Now, this URL will give you the actuator endpoints which are exposed. By default, there is only one endpoint, that is health. By default, health endpoint is exposed. By default, health endpoint exposed in actuators. What is the endpoint exposed by default? By default, /health endpoint exposed. Okay, that means we can access that endpoint directly. Now let's take this URL. Go to browser and send the request. What is the health of my application now? Can you see what is the health of my application? Up. That means my application is stable. My application can run. Whatever the memory is required, whatever the resources are required, they are available for my application. By using actuator health endpoint, I'm able to understand that my health of the application, the health of my application is up. The health of my application is up. Are you able to follow this? Are you able to follow this? Come on. Are you able to follow this? Koncham. Ritu Singh, you are not able to follow. Why koncham? Why not fully? Kya difficulty hai bhai? Just read it. People are saying I am understanding koncham, thoda. Not thoda. Pura samajh mein aana hai. It's very important. Damn sure question in the interview. What is actuator in the Spring Boot? It is a damn sure interview question. Got it? Yeah, please read this point. Actuator is one of the powerful feature available in Spring Boot. Actuators are used for providing production ready features for the application. By using actuators, we can monitor and manage our application. By using actuators, we can monitor and manage our application. What is the health of our application? How many beans loaded, config properties, heap, threads, URL mappings, all these things will provide by actuator. How to use that actuator? There is one dependency in the Spring Boot. We need to add the dependency in the pom.xml. Then actuator will be enabled for our application. There is a dependency in the Spring Boot. By using the dependency, we can enable actuator endpoints. Spring Boot starter actuator. Now, once the actuator dependency added, which endpoint is exposing by default? Is it exposing all the endpoints or it is exposing only one endpoint? It is exposing only one endpoint. one endpoint. What is that endpoint? What is that endpoint it is exposing? Health endpoint only it is exposing. Which endpoint it is exposing, guys? Health endpoint only it is exposing. By default, you can if you add the actuator dependency, that means you can access the health by default. Sir, then what about remaining things? How can I see the beans loaded? How can I see the config props? How can I see the heap information? How can I see the threads information? How can I see the URL mappings? We need to expose the remaining endpoints. We need to expose the remaining endpoints available in the actuators. Okay, exposing remaining endpoints in the actuators. In order to expose the remaining endpoints in the actuators, in order to expose remaining endpoints available in the actuator, we need to add some property. Management dot web dot management dot endpoints dot web dot exposure dot include star. Management dot endpoints dot web dot exposure dot include. So what is the meaning of include star? I want to expose all the endpoints which are given by the actuator. I want to expose all the endpoints which are given by the actuator. Now let's run our application and see how many endpoints will be exposed when I give star. Right click, run as boot app. In the console only you can see the count. In the console only you can see the count. Value must only contain include star. Include star. Let's see. Run as boot app. Now it started. How many endpoints are exposed now? How many endpoints are exposed now? 13. Earlier, when I have not added this property, how many endpoints exposed? Only 1. Now, how many endpoints are exposed? 13. What are the 13? Just to hit this URL. Oh, these all are the endpoints which are exposed. Now, what is the first one? Beans. Okay, if you hit the URL beans, what it is giving? All the classes which are loaded by our application in the JSON format. All the classes which are loaded by application. Now let us see. My greet REST controller is loaded. Let us see. My greet REST controller is loaded. REST controller. Okay. Welcome REST controller is available and greet REST controller will be available. REST controller. Greet. Greet REST controller loaded. Welcome REST controller. Welcome REST controller also loaded. Can you see the beans which are loaded by our application by using beans endpoint? By using beans endpoint, can you see the endpoints which are loaded? Next one is mappings. There is a mappings endpoint. What is the purpose of a mappings endpoint? All the URL patterns which are loaded. All the URL patterns which are loaded. Okay. Next one, heap dump. To download the heap data, we can go for heap dump. It will download one file. See here, heap dump file is downloaded. We can analyze that a heap file. And we can go for thread dump. We can go for thread dump. It is showing you all the threads which are running. All the threads which are running. Next one is loggers. You can see the loggers which are available. You can see environment of our application, loggers. All the loggers are available at the info level. All the loggers are available at the info level. Root level is info. Levels of error, warn, info, debug, trace. The root level logger is info available in our application. Right? Metrics of our application. Metrics of our application. You can get the metrics of our application. See here, these are the metrics of our application which is executing. Application started time, disk free, disk total, all the information we are getting. actuator info, actuator conditions, config props. We have one config props endpoint. What is the purpose of config props? It will give you all the configurations which are loaded. Can you see a port which is loaded by our application? Port, the port I have configured 9090 na, as a config property. See here, port 9090, which is loaded. The config props which are loaded by our application, we can access by using config props, right? By default, health endpoint exposed in actuators. If we want to expose all the actuator endpoints, if we want to expose all actuator endpoints, then we will write below property. If we want to expose all the actuator endpoints, then we will write below property in application.properties file. Then we can write below property in the application properties file. What is that property file? Management.endpoints.webexposure.include is equal to star. Star means everything. Star means everything. /beans. It will give all the beans which are loaded by our application. /beans is one endpoint which will give all the beans loaded by our application. /mappings, it will give all the URL mappings available in our application. /mappings, it will give all the URL mappings available in our application. /health, it will give health status of our application. Health status of our application. Config props, it will give config properties loaded by our application. Config props, right? Next one, metrics. It will give metrics of our application. Loggers, it will give loggers configured in our application. Etc. Like this, there are several endpoints are available. Thread dump, heap dump, thread dump. It will give all the threads information in our application. Heap dump, it will download the heap details of our application. Heap dump, it will download heap information in one file, heap dump file. Okay, like this, there are several endpoints are available in the actuator. So whenever you add actuator dependency in the pom.xml, by default only health endpoint is exposed. By default, health endpoint exposed in the actuators. If we want to expose all actuator endpoints, then we will write below property in application.properties file. Management.endpoints.web.exposure.include. I will give it as a star. Okay, beans. It will give all the beans which are loaded by our application. Mappings, all the URL mappings available in our application. Health status of our application. Config props loaded by our application. Metrics, loggers, and thread dump, heap dump, etc. Now, sir, I have a requirement. I want to expose all but not beans. Can we exclude one endpoint? Based on the requirement, we can exclude the endpoints also using actuators configuration. By using, we can exclude actuator endpoints using below configuration in application.properties file. You can include the endpoints and we can exclude the endpoints also. Guys, currently when you see our application, how many endpoints are exposed? Currently, how many endpoints are exposed? Currently, how many endpoints are exposed? 13, because I have included all. I want to exclude one endpoint, which is management dot endpoints dot web dot exposure dot exclude. I'm giving beans. What is the meaning of this? Include star, exclude beans. So what is the meaning of this configuration? What is the meaning of this configuration? What is the meaning of this configuration? All the endpoints I want to expose except beans. I want to exclude the beans here. Now right click, run as boot app. Right click, run as boot app. Now can you see how many endpoints are exposed now? How many endpoints are exposed now? Only 12. Only 12. Go to actuator URL. Beans is coming or not? Beans not coming. Can you try to access beans now? Can you try to access beans now? 404. Can you try to access beans now? No, because beans endpoint we have not exposed. Can we exclude multiple endpoints? Can we exclude multiple endpoints? Mappings also I want to exclude. Mappings also I want to exclude. Now let's stop this. Run this application. Run as boot app. Run this application and run as boot app. See here, how many endpoints are exposed now? Only 11, because I have excluded mappings also. Now you cannot access beans. You cannot access beans. You cannot access mappings because both are excluded from my configuration. I want to expose all the endpoints except beans and mappings. Except beans and mappings. Understand? Now, all the endpoints, all these endpoints are binded to HTTP GET request, guys. Now, all these endpoints, these all are binded to HTTP GET request. All these actuator endpoints are predefined, and they are binded to HTTP GET request. Are you understanding my point? Are you understanding my point? All these actuator endpoints are predefined and they are binded to HTTP GET request. All these actuator endpoints are predefined and they are binded to HTTP GET request. Is this clear? Is this clear? Now, we have one special endpoint in the actuator. We have one special endpoint in the actuator that is called shutdown endpoint. By using shutdown is a special endpoint in the actuator. By using that, we can stop our application also. In actuator, we have a special endpoint called shutdown that is binded to HTTP post request, which is used to stop the application. In actuator, we have a special endpoint called /shutdown. This is special. Why I am calling as a special? This endpoint is binded to HTTP post request. This shutdown endpoint is binded to HTTP post request. The shutdown endpoint is binded to HTTP post request. Using this endpoint, we can stop our application. Using this endpoint, we can stop our application. Are you guys clear with this one? We have to enable and expose this endpoint in our configuration. We have to enable and expose shutdown endpoint. We have to enable and expose shutdown endpoint in our configuration. This is a special. Now, see here how we are going to write this. Management dot endpoints dot web dot management dot endpoints dot web dot management dot endpoints dot web dot shutdown exposure management dot endpoints dot include, one second, I forgot that, management dot shutdown dot management dot endpoints dot shutdown dot enabled is equal to true. Management dot endpoint dot shutdown dot enabled is equal to true. So we need to write this endpoint. Okay, now let me stop my application. Let's run our application, run as boot app. Run our application. Run our application. Application started. How many endpoints are there now? 12. Earlier 11, because total 13. Out of 13, I have excluded 2 and I have added 1. Now it became 12. Now go to this URL. Can you see that shutdown endpoint? Can you see the shutdown endpoint is exposed? Can you see the shutdown endpoint is exposed? Yes or no? Shutdown endpoint is exposed. Now, can I send a request to the shutdown endpoint from our browser? You got 405. Somewhere we have seen what is 405. Can you read this? Can you read this? Why we are getting 405? Why we are getting this method not allowed? Whenever I send a request from the browser, by default the browser will send a get request. But shutdown is binded to get request or shutdown is binded to post request. Post request. But what request I'm sending from my browser? Get request. Request method get not supported. What it is saying that? Request method get not supported. Request method get is not supported. Request method get not supported. Can we send a post request now? We need a postman. Go to postman. Go to postman. Go to postman. Go to postman. Close this. Close this. Give this URL. Post. Click on send. Shutting down by application stopped. Now you see the console. You see the console. Application got stopped. My application got stopped. Let me run the application and show you once again. Run as boot app. Run as boot app. Run as boot app. Is my application running? Started. You can see server is also on. Now let's go to our postman. Make a get request. What happened? Method not allowed 405. Why we are getting method not allowed? Why we are getting method not allowed? It is binded to post request. Click on post and send. Message shutting down by my application stopped. Go to this application stopped. Server stopped. server stopped. So can I say this is shutdown is a special endpoint? All the endpoint methods are binded to get request. All the endpoints are binded to get request. But a shutdown is the only endpoint which is binded to post request. There is a reason why they made it as a post, guys. If it is a get request, now everybody will send the request easily and the application will be stopped. They want to make it little bit complex. They want to make it little bit complex because if it is a get request, easily we can send the request from the browser and we will stop the application. So that's why they made it little different. They made it as a post. So you cannot send the post request from the browser directly. You need to go for a postman and you need to send that request. All right. Now read this. With this we know what is actuator in the Spring Boot. Actuator is one of the feature available in Spring Boot. Actuator is one of the feature available in Spring Boot. Actuators are used for providing production ready features. These all are called as production ready features, guys. Whatever I can say, these all are accessing all this information, nothing but getting the production ready features. Official definition is that actuators are used for providing production ready features of the application. By using actuators, we can monitor and manage our application. Now, my application is running in one server. The server is available in one computer. The computer is available in USA. Getting my point? My application is running in one computer. That computer is running in one server. That server is running in computer. Computer is running in USA. When my application is running in that computer server, how can I understand my application details? What is the health? How many beans? Config props, threads, heap, beans, loggers, environment, all the things. In order to access, in order to monitor, in order to manage our application, in order to monitor and in order to manage our application, we are using actuators concept. Actuators provided by Spring Boot. Actuators provided by Spring Boot. To configure actuators in our application, Spring Boot provided below starter. To configure actuators in our application, Spring Boot provided below starter. We have to add that in pom.xml file. Spring Boot starter actuator. Once our application started, we can use below URL to see actuator endpoints. Once our application started, we can use below URL to see actuator endpoints which are exposed. This is the URL to see all the endpoints which are exposed. What is the default endpoint which is exposed in the actuator? Health only. By default, which endpoint is exposed? By default, which endpoint exposed? Health endpoint exposed. How can I expose all the endpoints? By writing this property. Management.endpoints.web.exposure.include. Management.endpoints.web.exposure.include. This is the property name. Star means everything. So total 13 endpoints it will expose. Total how many endpoints it is going to expose? Total 13 endpoints it will expose. Total 13 endpoints it will expose. Okay. These are the some endpoints. Some examples I have given. All these endpoints, all these actuator endpoints, we can access. These all are binded to get request. These all are binded to get request. How to access one particular endpoint? How to access one particular endpoint? Accessing the event point. Access endpoint. Access endpoint. How can we access http://localhost:9090/actuator/endpoint name? How can we access the endpoint? How can we access this endpoint? This endpoint we can access by using this URL. http://localhost:9090/actuator/endpoint name. By using that URL, we can access. Now, If you don't want to enable or if you don't want to expose particular endpoint, can we exclude it? Can we exclude one endpoint in the actuator? Yeah, we can exclude it by using beans and mappings. We can exclude one endpoint by using beans and mappings. Okay. In actuator, we have a special endpoint called shutdown. In actuator, we have a special endpoint called shutdown. This shutdown endpoint is binded to HTTP post request. Using this endpoint, we can stop our application. My application is running. I want to stop it. For that, we have an endpoint. Right. How can we enable this shutdown? By default, shutdown is disabled in the Spring Boot. In order to enable it, we should write this property management.endpoint.shutdown.enabled. Management.endpoint.shutdown.enabled is equal to true. When you send a request to this endpoint /shutdown, then that application will be stopped. This is binded to post request, guys. You can't send the post request from the browser directly. You need a postman to send this request. You need a postman to send this request. So the conclusion is the actuator is one of the powerful concept in the Spring Boot, which is providing some endpoints to monitor and manage our application. In order to use actuators in our application, we should add the actuator dependency in the pom.xml, which is provided by Spring Boot. Here in the properties file, you can configure which endpoints you want to expose, which endpoints you want to exclude, shutdown you want to enable or not. So this is the total configuration of our application.properties file. You got my point? So with this, you understand what is actuator in the Spring Boot and how to work with the actuator in the Spring Boot. Fine. Thank you.